I was raising my glass to another year of life when the waitress slipped a folded note beneath my palm, and the room stopped breathing. "I'm sorry, ma'am. He comes here every Wednesday with a younger woman." The words bled in blue ink across a butter-smudged receipt, the candle on my cake sputtering as if it knew. My husband's smile curdled. My daughter's fork froze midair. My grandson's paper crown tilted. The hum of the AC, the clink of ice in sweet tea, the hiss from the open kitchen. Everything got loud and far away at once. I am Eleanor Hart, 66, and on that vinyl booth at our neighborhood grill, humiliation tasted like vanilla frosting and metal. Tom reached for the note, knocking over his water. The lemon wheel spun like a tiny sun, then sank. The waitress, ponytail tight, eyes glassy with apology, stood her ground. I could feel the sticky varnish under my fingertips, hear the TV sportscaster yammering while my family stared. "It's a lie," he muttered, jaw flexing, but I'd already traced the waitress's trembling handwriting twice, as if my touch could smudge the truth away. The smell of garlic butter and fried onions turned sour in my throat as the happy birthday chorus died on my lips. My son cleared his throat. My daughter whispered my name. Tom's face wore that tired, practiced innocence I'd started recognizing on late nights and louder showers. I looked at the waitress's ink, then at the man who'd promised me forever, the sparkler on my slice hissing like a fuse. I will tell you exactly how a simple birthday dinner detonated into this, how the signs were there, how I ignored the receipts and the cologne, and how a stranger chose my cake to deliver the truth. If you believe that secrets don't belong at a family table, and that every woman deserves the whole story, subscribe to follow what came before and what I did next. The candle guttered and smoke curled up in a thin question mark as Tom's hand hovered between the note and my face. "Eleanor," he said, "the name that has been mine since my mother wrote it in careful script inside my little golden books," sounding suddenly like something he was trying on and about to return. The waitress stood there in her scuffed black flats, the kind women wear when the floors are always slick with mop water and butter, eyes shiny with that particular dread that comes from telling the truth and watching it hit. "I'm sorry," she said again, barely a whisper, southern vowels softening the sting. You looked so happy." My grandson's paper crown had slid over one ear, catching in his hair. His fork was still held hostage midair, a speared strawberry wobbling like a ruby in front of teeth that have just learned to bite with adult seriousness. Claire, my daughter, is 40, and sat across from me with her napkin twisted into a cord, her eyes darting between us as if she were back in middle school, bracing for a parent-teacher conference that would make everyone cry. My son, Marcus, cleared his throat twice, and then looked down at the little plastic dinosaur Lucas had brought for the cake. The dinosaurs had seemed like a charming joke half an hour ago. Now they felt like a prophecy I didn't know how to read. "It's a mistake," Tom said. And even through the noise, the sports announcer yammering at the bar about some trade, the hiss from the kitchen, the clink of ice in sweet tea sweating onto coaster napkins, I heard what wasn't in his voice. It wasn't indignation. It wasn't disbelief. It was fatigue and a thin film of annoyance, like I had brought his bad day to the table and let it ruin the shrimp and grits. I have been married to this man for 43 years, and I know his tells the way I know the creak in the third stair or the stickiness of our back door when August humidity swells the wood. There is a softness around his mouth when he thinks he's smarter than you, a tuck at the corner of his eye like a bookmark where he leaves his patience. He reached again, slow and careful, and I did him the courtesy of sliding the note out of the way so he only smudged the butter that had anchored it to the table. "It's not..." He started to say a dozen things. I could see them lined up like condiments behind a counter. Mistake, misunderstanding, jealous coworker, someone else's husband, a practical joke. But he picked, "It's malicious." It sounded too clean in his mouth. The waitress lifted her chin a fraction. She had a name tag that read Maddie and a tiny silver cross at the base of her throat. "I've seen him," she said, not unkindly. "He orders meatloaf on Wednesdays, extra gravy. He calls me kiddo. I remembered because my granddad used to call me that, and..." She stopped and swallowed. "I didn't know it was your husband until he came in here last week. and you were with him, and I thought I'd throw up right into the salad prep." Claire closed her eyes, which she does when she's praying in a pew or when she's thinking of something terrible she can't fix. Marcus put a hand on the table, steadying the wobbling sugar caddy. Lucas whispered, "Grandma?" And that one word was the rope I picked up without losing my balance. I leaned toward him, smoothing the paper crown, finding it sweet that he'd insisted on wearing it, even though he'd claimed he was too old now for birthday hats. His ear was warm under my palm. "It's okay, sweetheart," I said, and I meant it the way mothers mean things when their own boats are taking on water. "Eat your strawberry." We sang, or rather, they sang and I moved my lips. I made a wish because that is the superstition you teach children. And the wish was that I would be braver in the next hour than I had been over the last 2 years. I blew out the flame and cut into the cake, the knife dragging through frosting and sponge the color of old snow, the middle layer leaning like a tiring dancer. I served everyone a piece with my birthday smile, the one I've learned to put on because birthdays belong to the people who love you. And then I excused myself to go to the bathroom, bringing the folded note in my palm like a pressed flower that might crumble if I breathed on it. Maddie followed me down the hallway, where the walls were hung with framed pictures of someone's grandparents' fishing days, all sepia and smiles. The door marked "Women" was stuck, and it took a little shoulder to open it, the way old doors ask for a favor. Inside, the light over the mirror had one bulb flickering, and I was grateful for that half-kindness. "What car?" I asked, my voice calm, the kind of calm that had gotten me through toddler tantrums in Target, and my mother's slow forgetting of our names. "What car does he drive?" "Silver," she said, cheeks blotchy, words tumbling. "A sedan. Honda, I think. He sits in the back. Booth 12 because it's tucked in the corner. She's young, late 20s, maybe 30. Long hair, lighter than mine. She wears a little bracelet with a charm, like a tiny pineapple. They share the meatloaf," she added, her mouth pulling. "He calls her Peach. I don't know if that's her real name. He pays cash." "I see," I said. And I did. I saw 100 small things that had lined up like ants, unnoticed until they made a line across my kitchen floor, and I had to decide whether to step over them or get the broom. The new cologne he joked he bought on sale because, why should the young guys smell so good? The gym bag packed on Wednesdays. The shower when he came home that he said was because he was sweaty from pickup basketball. And then the way the bathroom smelled like hotel soap. The extra line item on our bank statement that he blamed on auto pay for streaming and then canceled with a flurry of annoyance when I asked if it was really ours. The 2 nights he came home with flowers because the grocery store was selling them cheap. And, "Doesn't the house look good with color?" Yes, Thomas Hart, it did. It looked like a stage set. "I'm sorry," Maddie said again, but she wasn't talking about herself. "Thank you," I told her. I washed my hands and didn't look in the mirror. I had seen my face enough in 66 years to know that looking wouldn't tell me anything new. The note was damp by the time I tucked it into my purse. Back at the table, we ate our cake in small bites, like the act itself might take up enough time to deliver us to a different reality. Tom made a joke about the frosting being too sweet, which was safe territory. Claire asked Lucas about his Lego kit. Marcus refolded his napkin until it was a triangle, and then another triangle. When the bill came, Tom went to reach for it, and I put my hand on top of his. "I've got this," I said, and my voice was bright with the kind of cheer you put on at church coffee hour when you don't want anyone to ask if you've lost weight. I took out my card, the one with my name on it that I opened 3 years ago after a lunchtime conversation with the librarian where I volunteer, who had told me, while stickers for the summer reading program stuck to her forearm, "Always have one thing that's yours. A card, a key, a friend." Tom's eyes flicked to mine, then to the card, then back. "Eleanor," he said, "no one's making a scene, right?" "No," I said, and poured the last of the sweet tea into my glass. "No one is making a scene." We drove home with the air conditioning up, because the July night was the kind that sits on your chest and says, "Don't rush." The neighborhoods off Glenwood were slow with sprinklers, windows lit up with televisions making moving blues on ceilings. Tom's hands were at 10 and 2. He always drives like the DMV camera is still on him. The radio was tuned low to a country station. I could smell a faint sweetness in the car. That wasn't the tree-shaped air freshener hanging from the mirror. It was something like citrus and pepper, and it hit me new, like smelling your own perfume in a room you didn't expect. "You can't take the word of a waitress on a Wednesday," he said finally, the words coming out careful, choosing safe ground. "These girls, they see a lot. People bring clients. They assume." "She said you call her Peach," I said softly. He huffed through his nose, a small laugh without air in it. "Is that what she said? That's ridiculous." "You do call people food sometimes when you think it's charming," I said, and I heard how mean that sounded and wanted to pull it back. I have never been good at mean. It scratches my throat. He turned into our cul-de-sac, tires crunching very softly on grit. Our house was the third on the right, porch light a warm coin in the night. Our hydrangea by the steps was doing that show-off thing it does in July. Big blue blooms like someone had painted them with the sky and then left out the cloud. "Eleanor," he said, cutting the engine. The sudden quiet was like being dropped into a pool. "If you embarrass me in front of the kids ever again..." I looked at him. Really looked. And watched that mouth. Watched the tuck at his eye. Watched the skin at his throat that I'd kissed at 23 and 40 and 58. "If I embarrass you," I said, and very gently found my purse and opened the door. The night put its arm around me in that way Raleigh nights do, all cicadas and grass. "I'm going inside," I said, and I went up the steps with my birthday helium balloon bobbing above me like a patient moon. In the kitchen, the counters were clean because I had made them so before we left. I have always liked starting a party with a clean space. I set the leftover cake on the island and stood for a moment with my hand on the cool stone. From the living room, I could hear Tom's keys drop in the bowl and his shoes be placed exactly side by side on the mat, the way he shows love to the house so he can take something with his hands. I poured a glass of water, drank it, rinsed it, and set it out to dry. My motions were small, tidy, like I wanted to empty the air of anything extra. I went to our bedroom and closed the door, not quite all the way. My robe was hanging on the back of the door, summer weight, white with little blue flowers like the ones that used to show up on my grandmother's aprons when she made biscuits on Saturday mornings. I put it on and sat at my vanity, the heavy old oak one that Tom found at the flea market 20 years ago for $30 and refinished in the garage with sandpaper and patience. In the mirror, I watched my hands fold the note. My hands looked like my mother's did at this age, with veins like tiny roads, and a small brown spot, like a comma on my left ring finger. I flattened the paper and read the ink again, the blue that had bled when my skin met it. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the air conditioning to click on and off twice. Long enough for me to feel the first tendrils of what I can only call decision. I took out the shoebox I keep at the back of the closet where some people keep shoes they'll never wear again. Mine has tax returns and old report cards, and the letter from my mother that came the week Lucas was born, where she wrote, in her crabbed hand, "You were a good baby. You are a good mother. You are allowed good things." It also has receipts. 2 Christmases ago, Tom came home late from a rotary holiday mixer and set his sport coat over the back of the chair without emptying the pockets. He has always been careful, but we had had a fight that morning about the dryer lint trap, and he was distracted. In the pocket were 2 receipts, one from a bar on Hillsborough, one from our own neighborhood grill, both signed T. Hart with a little flourish he doesn't know he does. Both on Wednesdays. Both for 2 entrees and 2 desserts. When I asked about them, he told me he'd bought dinner for a client, a young guy who had a sweet tooth and a fondness for pecan pie. He kissed my head and said, "You can be so funny, Elle," as if I'd told a joke instead of asked a question. I put the receipts in the box under the birth certificates and told myself that a man is allowed to be kind to clients. I told myself that a marriage is not a detective novel. I told myself I was too old to be jealous, which might be true. But too old to be lied to? No. I lay down in the quiet and remembered the first time I saw Tom Hart. I was 19, and he had borrowed someone else's canoe on Lake Johnson, and he kept calling the canoe she, because that's what men do with boats and cars. and he had a sunburn on his nose that peeled like onion paper the next week. He laughed loudly and slept easily, and wanted so much to be impressive that it softened him. I liked how he stood between me and the road when we crossed streets. I liked how he listened to my stories. I liked how he said, L, like the letter could be my whole name. We married with toasting glasses borrowed from Claire's pastor because our own set had cracked when my cousin knocked them off the table dancing to Al Green on a record player that skipped. We bought a house in a new neighborhood with sapling trees and a mailbox that leaned until the first good frost set it straight. He sold insurance and then real estate. I wanted to teach art, had even enrolled in classes at Meredith, but then Marcus had RSV that first winter, and the money was tighter than the lid on a new jar of jam, and it was easier to say, I'll wait. So I did. I was good at waiting. When Tom's mother fell and broke her hip, I said I would move her in. She called me Miss L, the way old Southern ladies do when they don't want to call you honey, because you're not theirs, but they're going to love you anyway. For 5 years, I gave her baths, and I wiped her chin, and I learned how to cut meat into tiny pieces, and how to be patient with stories you have heard 20 times, because what matters is the telling. Tom kissed our heads on his way out to work, and sometimes stopped for Bojangles on the way home, and told me he'd eat in the car because the smell might make his mother's stomach turn. I said, and did nothing, because that is how you keep a house ordered. I sold my mother's sapphire ring the fall Marcus needed tuition money. He didn't know that. He still doesn't. Tom was between closings and it was a stretch, and I said, we'll figure it out. And then I drove to a pawn shop on Capitol Boulevard, where the man behind the bulletproof glass seemed surprised I cried. He gave me $300 and said, You bringing it back to buy? I'll give it to you for $4. And I smiled and said, Let's hope we meet in happier times. And we never did. Nobody forced me to make those choices. I know that. A marriage is made out of the small yeses you say in kitchens. But there comes a time when you pick up a note, and your name and your life feel like two different things, and you decide which one you will take into the next room. In the morning, the house smelled like coffee, because that is what mornings have smelled like in our house since the 80s, when a Mr. Coffee machine was the height of domestic sophistication. I woke before Tom, which he hates. He prefers to be the one moving first, humming that bit of whatever song he's been stuck on, flipping on the news, making noise that says, I provide. But I wanted the quiet hour that belongs to women of a certain age, when the light is soft, and the birds are doing their report, and the mailman's truck is still a promise. I fed the cat. I watered the fern on the porch, its fronds reaching down like gossiping ladies. I made coffee and drank it from the mug Claire bought me that says, Nana's Kitchen, open 24/7. I opened the back door, and the air came in carrying cut grass and the sweetness from the neighbor's crepe myrtles. When Tom patted in, hair sticking up like a young boy's, he said, Morning, Elle, as if the night had been a misplaced page we would both skip. Morning, I said. I poured him a cup, added cream and a half spoon of sugar the way he likes, though he always says he prefers it black, because he thinks it sounds more dignified. He sat and unfolded the paper we still get, because I like the feel of newsprint and the smudgy fingers it gives you. He looked at the headlines and then at me. About last night, he began, and I started a load of laundry so the machine's steady working would be a metronome for my patience. I don't know what that woman thought she saw, but you can't believe everything someone writes on a receipt. I don't, I said, putting a sheet of Bounce in because I like the smell. I believe what the man I married looks like when he isn't telling me the truth. He set down his mug. Eleanor, you're tired. You're sensitive. Birthdays do this to you. We have been having some version of that sentence for 30 years. I am sensitive when I ask why he told our friends at the lake that I was stingy with vacation money. I am sensitive when I suggest we talk about retirement. I am sensitive when I point out that he calls me by my full name mostly when he is annoyed. Sensitive. It is a small word that pushes women into corners without leaving bruises anyone else can see. I'm going to the library this afternoon, I said, and he brightened, because he knows that means I will come home with books, and I will have been useful to the world in a way that doesn't threaten him. And I might meet Ruth for lunch. He frowned, just slightly. Ruth still going on about that investment thing? You know I told you. I know, I said. She just wants to talk." He looked at me for a long moment as if he were looking for an instruction manual he'd misplaced. "I'll be at the office," he said. "Long day. We've got to walk through at 3. I don't know when I'll get home." "Is it Wednesday?" I asked. I kept my eyes on the lint trap. I pulled out the soft collected ghosts of a month and rolled them into a ball for the trash. He blinked. "No," he said. "It's Tuesday." He smiled. "See? You're all twisted around." I called Ruth after he left. Ruth from church, with her hair like spun sugar, and her habit of touching your arm when she's about to tell you the truth. We have shared pews and casseroles and the kind of prayers you don't say out loud because they feel like secrets. "I need counsel," I said when she answered, and she didn't say, "About what?" She said, "Do you want me to come to you, or do you want to meet where we can be noisy?" We met at Panera, because that is where women of our age go when we need to feel like someone else will clean up the crumbs. She bought me a cinnamon crunch bagel, and I told her the thing that had happened with the note. "Oh, honey," she said, very quietly, and then she said it again like a blessing. "Oh, honey." We talked in that gentle, coded way Southern women do when the thing is terrible, but the world around you is full of people in baseball caps trying to decide if they need a half salad or a whole. "Don't confront," she advised, and her eyes were clear. "Not yet. Not until you have what you can't be talked out of. Not until you can hear what he says like it's a script and not a revelation. You decide what your line is, and then you hold it. My line." The phrase sat there like a pencil on a ruled page, sharp and waiting. On the way home, I stopped at the phone store because I am old enough to know that paper tells stories people try to hide. "I need my call logs," I said to a young man with a name tag that said Darius, and a smile, like he wanted to be helpful because his grandmother raised him to be. "For the last 6 months. For my husband's line, too. We pay together." He showed me how to log in on my phone and pull the numbers, all those little ladders of digits. I wrote down a number that showed up on Wednesdays like a church bell. I printed the bill at the library because I couldn't bring myself to do it at home. I tucked the paper into the shoebox when I got back and placed it under the birth certificates like this was another birth. I called the restaurant and asked to speak to a manager. "We don't want any trouble," I said, surprising myself with how reasonable I sounded. "I just want to know if booth 12 is available tomorrow night." "Yes, ma'am," he said. "We can reserve it for you. 7 o'clock. "That would be perfect," I said, and there was a buzzing under my skin that felt like standing up after sitting in church too long. I was careful. I told no one else. I put fresh sheets on the guest bed because busy hands make waiting softer. I put money in an envelope and set it in the drawer with my socks, just in case. I made a casserole and put half in the freezer and wrote the date on the foil because, no matter what comes, people have to eat. In the quiet of that afternoon, with the fan turning like an old hymn overhead, I took out a piece of paper and wrote down 3 things. 1. I will not yell. 2. I will not cry where he can use my tears as evidence of my fragility. 3. I will not forget the decades in which I was strong. I thought of times that strength had been a blanket over our table. The time Marcus broke his wrist on the monkey bars, and I drove us to WakeMed in a rain that made everyone else pull over. And I told jokes in the waiting room because he seemed ashamed of his pain. The time Claire called from Wilmington because she was pregnant and scared, and the father had decided he wasn't ready to be ready, and I drove down with a cooler of pimento cheese and apples and said, "We raise babies in this family. We do not drop them." The time Tom's business went flat in 2008, and I watched him stare at spreadsheets like they were slowly taking away the things he had used to define himself. And I took a job at Belk in the lingerie department fitting women for bras and telling them truths about their bodies in the mirror that made them stand taller. I brought home cash in a small envelope that smelled like perfume, and we paid the light bill, and he told me I was an angel. He never once asked how many nights I went to bed with my feet aching and my mind zinging with other people's sizes. That evening, Tom was gentle in a way that makes it clear he knows he owes something. He cut the lawn with the lines neat and straight like a baseball field. He brought in the mail and placed it next to my reading glasses with a flourish. He asked me about my day and waited for my answers like they were to be graded. He made a show of plugging his phone into the charger on the kitchen counter, screen up, like an offering. I'm beat, he said at 10, when the news was over and the weather promised another heat index that would make people cranky in checkout lines. Long day. He stretched and yawned, his back cracking softly. Come on to bed, Elle. You're no good with those mysteries after 10. They'll give you dreams. I went, and in the dark, his breath was steady, and then heavy, and then that small snore he has when he's on his back. I lay on my side and watched the green numbers on the clock change. At some point, even my body agreed to sleep, because that is the grace our bodies give us when our minds have run out of helpful stories. In the morning, I woke with a kind of clear-eyed calm that I recognized from the day I showed up at the hospital with my bag when Claire was in labor. You can plan, and then there comes a moment when planning becomes doing. Tom was already gone, his side of the bed cold, a note on the counter. Walk through at noon. Lunch with Dan. See you tonight. He had drawn a smiley face next to his name like we were passing notes in high school. I put the note in the shoebox. Not because it was evidence of anything except the way he likes to put a flourish on sentences that don't need them. I went to the salon that does senior discounts on Wednesdays and asked for a trim. Just the split ends, I said to the stylist with the long lashes who calls everyone baby. She spun me toward the mirror and we smiled at each other like sisters. You got a date? She asked, teasing. You might say that, I said, and she laughed and told me my gray was coming in pretty, like frost on morning grass. I went by the church and lit a candle in the small side chapel, even though we are Methodists, and candles are a tradition I borrowed from my Catholic neighbor because light is light. I sat on the wooden pew and let the quiet be a blanket. Dear God, I said simply, as if I were writing a note to a friend, help me to be me in this. The afternoon stretched and snapped and stretched again. I ironed Tom's best blue shirt and then set it back in the closet like I was setting a trap for someone else. I took out the sweater my mother knitted when I was headed to college, that sea green one with the cable down the front, and smoothed it even though it was the wrong season. I put Lucas's drawing of a dinosaur with a party hat on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a pineapple. I looked at the pineapple charm in my mind and wondered what kind of girl wears that, and what kind of man notices, and what kind of grandmother takes that detail and puts it in her pocket like a stone for later. At 6:45, I went to the restaurant. The July heat lifted for a moment when a small cloud passed over the sun, and I took that as a kindness. The hostess looked at me with recognition because, of course, we were just here, but her smile didn't falter. Booth 12? She said brightly. We have that ready for you. Thank you, I said. And if my voice shook, it only did it for me. The booth was in the back, tucked under a framed photograph of a fishing boat heading out into morning fog. I set my purse beside me and folded my hands. Maddie saw me, and the pity that had been in her eyes 2 nights ago had been replaced with something like respect. She brought me water without asking and set it down with a steady hand. Do you want to order? She asked. In a bit, I said. Thank you, Maddie. You don't have to thank me, she said. But you're welcome. I checked my watch. 7, 7:05, 7:10. The door opened, and the small bell made that sound like a laugh that has lost its joke. A couple came in, then a family, then a man in a ball cap who took his burger and sat facing the game. At 7:13, I saw the silver Honda turn into the lot. I knew it because I have ridden in it for 8 years, and I can tell by the way it takes a speed bump how a driver feels about surprises. He parked 3 spaces from the door under the light that drags mosquitoes into its circle. Tom got out, smoothed his shirt, and looked at himself in the reflection of the window, the way men do without admitting they are doing it. He checked his watch, and then he looked to the side as if he were about to say hello to someone he didn't want to seem eager for. She was there a moment later. The long hair, the charm bracelet that caught the light and flashed a little pineapple. She touched his arm with the back of her fingers, a gesture too practiced to be new, and he smiled a smile I knew and didn't. They stood for a moment, heads tipped toward each other, like conspirators in a painting. Then he put his hand on her lower back, the way he's done with me 1,000 times, and guided her toward the door. I placed my hand on the table. My fingers left little moons in the condensation outside my water glass. The doorbell made its small music, and they were inside. And there was the moment you prepare for, and then go blank for? When all your rehearsed lines run away like kids who've rung a doorbell and sprinted. Tom's eyes scanned the room. He saw me. His face went through 3 expressions so fast you needed a slow-motion replay. Surprise, calculation, something like plea. He stopped at the edge of the booth, his hand still on the girl's back, his voice finding that polite tone he uses when he runs into people from church at the grocery store. "Eleanor," he said, as if we had run into each other at the post office. "What are you doing here?" I looked up at him, at her, at the pineapple flashing at her wrist, and I felt suddenly and intensely like myself, at 9 on the first day of school, when my dress was ironed and my lunchbox was packed, and I knew my own name. "I'm sitting in booth 12, I said, and my voice was steady. "On a Wednesday." The girl, Peach, Pineapple, whoever she was, shifted her weight, uncertainty making a small wave in the air. She looked at Tom like he would hand her a script. He opened his mouth and closed it. He glanced toward the door, as if an exit might present itself that didn't require the truth. Maddie appeared at my elbow like a guardian angel in an apron. "Can I get y'all started with some drinks?" she asked. All business. Her smile so wide it was almost brave. Tom cleared his throat. He started, and I lifted a hand. "Sweet tea," I said to Maddie. "For them both. He likes extra lemon." I looked at the young woman. "Do you like lemon, dear? Or do you prefer it plain?" I like lemon," she said. Her voice was smaller than I expected. "Wonderful," I said. I looked at Tom. "Sit down," I told him. "Please, we are going to have a calm conversation in a public place because I won't be out-shouted at a table, has been my rule since 1983 when Marcus threw his peas on the floor, and I understood that volume doesn't mean victory." He sat. What else could he do? The girl slid in beside him. I took them in, the 2 of them, this arrangement like a photograph that would be somehow both proof and memory. I thought of my mother's note in the shoebox. "You are allowed good things." And I thought, very clearly, I am allowed a truth spoken aloud. Outside, a summer rain began to fall. That surprising kind that taps on hot pavement and turns the air into a sauna. Inside, the AC hummed, the TV sports announcer yammered about a trade, and the undercurrent of the kitchen's hiss felt like something winding up. In that moment, we were all waiting for the other to start the music. I did not know what would happen next, not entirely. I did not know what I would choose when my line was finally drawn. But my hands were steady on the table, my heartbeat was a metronome I could count to, and I had, at last, a booth with a number and a date. I had a waitress who had risked a tip because her conscience is more durable than cash. I had a life behind me heavy with casseroles and compromises, with held hands and handed-down quilts, with the ring I sold, and the nights I stood by the window waiting for headlights to turn into our drive. I had a name I had held since my mother wrote it in the front of a book, and it felt good in my mouth. "Tom," I said. "Let's begin." "Tom," I said. "Let's begin." He couldn't find a place to put his hands. He has salesman's hands. Competent, clean nails, the pale, pale heel where a wedding ring has lived. So seeing them fidget in midair as if they were waiting for permission unsettled me. He tucked them both under the table, then pulled one out to smooth the salt shaker's metal cap, then let it hover again over the edge of the table like maybe this was a ledge and not laminate. The young woman sat close enough to him that the cotton of her blouse pressed lightly against his sleeve when she breathed. She had the kind of skin that looks dewy no matter what, and the kind of posture you have when your back has yet to learn the stories it will carry. When she turned her wrist, the charm bracelet sang a little, 2 silver discs and that tiny pineapple catching the light like a fast wink. I tried to imagine meeting her on a different Wednesday, seeing her in line at Target, both of us looking at candles on clearance, her debating between sea salt and citrus and fresh linen, me reaching for summer porch, and neither of us knowing who the other was to a man we both called by the same name in different rooms. Maddie set down the sweet teas, extra lemon, and the clink of ice made the table feel real again. "Take your time," she murmured. but her eyes told me she understood that what was needed now was not time so much as a refusal to be hurried. "Eleanor," Tom said, and there it was again, that careful voice, as if he were walking me through a home inspection, pointing out the plumbing with cheer because no one wants to think about the old pipes. "This is—" "You may introduce her," I said, and I folded my hands in my lap because if I didn't, I was afraid they'd try to pick up my fork and stab gravity. He cleared his throat. This is Paige," he said, choosing it seemed an easier fruit than peach. She's from the office." Her eyes looked at me like she was trying to learn a new language in a hurry. "Nice to meet you," she whispered. And I knew, with that bone-deep sense women get around other women, that those words were honest. She had not expected to meet me. She had half expected I was a legend, like the wives in fairy tales who are lovely and absent. I could see in her the girl who makes lists of groceries on her phone and remembers her mother's birthday, and thought she could keep her world separate because that is what the men we love ask of us sometimes. And I could see the moment she understood there are no separations, just doors we choose to open or keep closed until someone else puts a note in our hands. "I'm Eleanor," I said. "I've been married to him for 43 years. I let the math stand between us. The length of a mortgage, of careers, of children who have grown into people. I'm also the person who taught him the difference between paprika and cayenne, who sat with his mother when she was afraid of the dark at 2 p.m, who deseeded pomegranates into bowls like jewels for Christmas, who learned to fold a fitted sheet so it wouldn't make the linen closet look like chaos." Her face softened at mother-in-law. It always does for women raised to be kind. She touched the pineapple charm without thinking, and I heard in my head all the church ladies who had told me that in the South, a pineapple means welcome. It means hospitality. It means the door is open and the bread is warm. I had one on my counter at home. The old brass trivet my Aunt Lorraine gave us when we moved into the house off Glenwood. I saw it suddenly as a translation error, a symbol that had forgotten to ask me whether I wanted to welcome this particular truth into my kitchen. "Paige," I said, her name tasting odd, because there was already a Claire and a Ruth and a Sylvia in my mouth from my life. "Did you know he was married?" She looked at him, and I felt a little fierce joy that even now she looked at him for the answer. "She is not my enemy," I reminded myself. Betrayal is an arrangement between two people and the lives they carry with them like shadow luggage. If I had to pick a villain, it would be that shrugging thing in our culture that says a woman my age is to be moved around like furniture while the room redecorates itself. "We're separated," he said quickly, the lie so practiced that for a second, it almost passed between us like a shared joke we could laugh at later. "It's complicated." "We are not separated," I said, and my voice had the steadiness of wood. "We share a mortgage, a grocery list, a cat, a church pew when we bother to go, an insurance policy with both our names, and grandchildren who ask him to cut the grilled cheese in triangles, not squares. I suppose that's complicated, but not in the way you mean." Paige looked down at her hands. I could see her nails were painted a milky pink, the kind you can repair with a clear coat if it chips. She nodded. Once. Twice. Her throat moved like swallowing something too big. I could have stopped there and said simply, "Go home." But the years behind me rose up like a choir, voices clear and insistent, and asked to be heard. One humiliation does not arrive alone. It invites its cousins. If this was to be a reckoning, let it carry all of them into the light, so I could recognize the shape of what I was laying down. "Tom," I said, and I didn't use L, and he heard that. "Do you remember the PTA bake sale when Claire was in 3rd grade and you said to Mrs. Fincher, 'Don't let Eleanor in charge of the money, she gets flustered with numbers'? You got a laugh. I brought 4 dozen brownies with pecans I couldn't afford that week, and I went home and pulled the lint trap and cried on my knees in front of the dryer, because the only place I could be undone was between the hum of machines." "Eleanor," he said softly, warning and plea wrapped up in my name. "Do you remember the time we went to the car dealership and you told the salesman, 'She just likes things in blue. The rest is my call'? And when I opened my mouth to say, 'Green, actually. I like green,' you patted the air like I was a dog who'd learned a trick, and you didn't want me to show it off where it didn't belong." Do you remember the night at the lake when you did that story where you say I put ketchup on my steak and everyone laughed and I laughed too, because we were on someone else's dock and casseroles taste like friendship? I didn't put ketchup on anything that night but my piece. His shoulders tightened, then dropped. He has a way of slumping into himself when the conversation turns to the kind of marshy ground he hates. I could list them, I said, hands placed flat on either side of the condensation ring from my glass as if framing what was there. I could be petty, but I have learned that devoting yourself to petty things is a different kind of betrayal of yourself. So let's say it this way. There have been 100 little places where you could have chosen me, and often you did. You were good, even great, in so many of the rooms of our life. But in this one, this booth that belongs to Wednesday nights, you did not. And whatever your reasons were, they don't change the truth of what that doing has done to me. He reached for my hand, and then seemed to remember himself, and let it hover back over the sugar caddy. I never meant... Intention is a coat that hides a stain, I said. I'll grant you the coat, Tom, but look at my dress. Paige made a small sound, so small that if I hadn't been listening for everything, I might have missed it. I didn't know, she said, whisper thin. I believe you, I told her, and I did. And if you did know, I still might look you in the eye and say, you deserve better than being the Wednesday girl. Women always deserve better than being the day of the week. Maddie set down 2 lemon wedges without being asked. Her hand was steady, and in that small thing I felt something like a blessing. The TV above the bar piped on about the Bulldogs, or maybe the Wolf Pack. College colors were flaring at the edge of plays I didn't care to understand. The scent of garlic butter held its own against the rain-streaked heat blowing in each time someone went out to their car for an umbrella they'd forgotten. I want you to tell her the truth, I said, quiet, and they both looked at me. Tom with a flash of alarm, Paige with that same flicker girls have on the high dive. If I'm to jump, do it cleanly. Tell her who I am to you. Tell her how long we've been married. Tell her if you told me you were having dinner with clients or playing pickup ball while you were sharing meatloaf in the back of this room. He swallowed. When Tom is on a losing listing and he knows it, he gets this look, a sort of soft-lipped determination like he might talk the drywall into hanging straighter. He reached for his tea, squeezed the lemon as if wringing the conversation into something bright and sweeter. Paige, he said, and if he was trying to make the name sound casual, it landed instead like a stone dropped from the porch to see how deep the well goes. I've been married to Eleanor for 43 years. And? I asked. Say the part you don't want to say. I told you we were working on it, he said, eyes on Paige's face as if, by telling her the past, he could borrow from the future. And I told Eleanor that I had pickup at the gym on Wednesdays. We have meatloaf, Paige whispered, almost to herself, and it would have been funny if it weren't so tender, how details peek out like kids that don't know they're not supposed to. Thank you, I said, because the truth, even in small pieces, deserves gratitude. Now tell me. I looked straight at him. Tell me why you call her Peach. Tell me what you were looking for on Wednesday that you couldn't ask of me on a Monday when the trash needed to go out. He rubbed that spot on his jaw that he rubs when he's trying to conjure self-awareness. I don't know, he said, and I knew that he believed he didn't. It just happened. Nothing just happens, I said. People happen. Choices happen. Wednesdays happen because we leave the other days to themselves until they become lonely. He looked down. The young woman's eyes flicked to the door, and then back to me as if asking permission to run. I thought of my daughter at 28, exhausted by her own kindness, and I knew that telling her to run would be a strange, brief mercy that would carry its own shame. Sometimes sitting still is the braver thing. I reached into my purse and took out the folded note. It was softened now. The blue ink bled just a little like a morning glory. I set it on the table between the teas. The table was sticky. The varnish always a little tacky here no matter how much you wipe it, and the paper adhered like it wanted to belong to this place. Then I slid my wedding ring off. My finger looked oddly naked, a pale indent where a promise had worn a groove. I placed the ring on the note, as if weighing down a tissue against a breeze. That, I said, looking at the two of them, is my symbol. That little circle is 4 decades of casseroles, school forms, funerals, mournings, apologies, and laughter. That paper is last Sunday, and how truth sometimes arrives on a scrap that smells like butter and smoke. What I do with one is about what the other has told me. I felt something inside me straighten like a woman standing from kneeling. For weeks, months, if I am honest with myself, I had felt stooped by what I suspected but couldn't name without proof. Now I had both, a circle and a square, a ring and a note, a long life and a short sentence. Enough. This is where I say my line, I told him, and I pictured the piece of paper I'd written on in the quiet afternoon. My 3 promises to myself. We are going to call our children on speaker. You are going to tell them that you have been seeing someone on Wednesdays at the Home Plate Grill. You are going to apologize for making me hold that story alone at my own birthday dinner. And then you are going to tell them how you plan to make amends. Because loving me does not excuse you from telling our children the truth. He looked up sharply. Here? Now? The pitch of his voice lifted, and I watched him rein it in because Tom cares very much what people at other tables think. He always has. In church, he will sing the harmony part more softly than the melody, because he doesn't want to be the one someone turns to and says, "Hush now." Yes, I said. Here and now. It is Wednesday night. It is booth 12. It is the place you made for secrets. It can be the place where we take them out and hold them to the light. Or you can refuse, and I will learn something more about you that will make what comes easier. Paige's hands were on her lap, threaded together. She looked at Tom as if she could will him brave. And because I am my mother's daughter, and because I know I could not have done this at 28, I said, "You may go, dear, if that's what you need. I will not think less of you for choosing to avoid someone else's reckoning. You have your own to tend to one day, and I wish for you to be loved in the open." Her eyes filled. She nodded jerkily, then did something I did not expect. She put her hand on the note just for a beat, as if to say, "I see it." Then she slid out of the booth. "I'm sorry," she said to me, and there was nothing glib in it. "Make your life a kinder one," I said, because the words came from my mouth before my brain could ask permission. She left, the little bell making its shy music again as the door swung and the rain's breath came in. It was just Tom and me then, and the sound of the game and cutlery and a man at the bar ordering another Bud Light like nobody else's heart was sitting open under the neon. He stared at the door and then at me, and then at the note and the ring. "You're going to ruin me," he said, and I could hear how he meant the me that goes to Rotary, and that says yes to committee chairs, and that tells jokes on docks. "No," I said. "You did that to yourself. I am going to rescue myself." For a second, I saw heat flare behind his eyes, that old flare that used to make me retreat, wrap humor around me like a shawl and change the subject, offer him a cookie because sugar is easier than truth. But it cooled, the way a summer sizzle cools when the thunder is far off and not headed your way. He pulled out his phone. He set it on the table and looked at me, waiting for permission like a teenager who's been grounded, but sees the car keys anyway. "Claire first," I said. "Then Marcus. Put it on speaker. Tell them before the grapevine does. You know how this town is. Maddie's got cousins, and the manager's wife teaches at the high school, and my water aerobics ladies can sniff a story at 20 yards between a flutter kick and a noodle exercise. Let it be your voice, not a rumor's." His fingers trembled, and I felt, because I am not stone, a brush of tenderness. He was a boy once, trying to remember his locker combination on the first day after summer. He was a young man once, sunburned at Lake Johnson, calling a canoe she. Love makes a museum of memories, and you cannot burn it down just because one exhibit has a faulty wire. You must walk carefully through, touch the glass lightly, and decide which rooms you never enter again. He tapped Claire's name. The phone trilled. She answered on the 3rd ring, the noise of her kitchen behind her. Those small clinks that tell you somebody is rinsing plates, life's orchestra. "Hey, Daddy," she said, and then, "Hey, Mom," because the speaker made my presence obvious. "Is everything okay?" "No," Tom said, eyes closing. "Baby, no, it's not," he told her, He did not decorate it. He did not use the word complicated. He said the place and the night and the length of it. He did not cry. His voice stayed steady, and I felt something that might have been gratitude and might have been mourning. The silence on the other end was a whole river. And then Claire said, very quietly, "Mama?" And I said, "I'm here. I'm coming," she said. "Do you want me to come?" "No," I said. "I'm at a table I need to finish sitting at. I want you to put Lucas to bed and sing him that silly dinosaur song he loves, and then you can call me again when the house is soft." "All right," she said, and then, "Daddy?" Its sound held the weight of every Girl Scout ceremony he had stood at. The heavy pride in her first day of work photo, the time he drove down to Wilmington to fix her sink, and came back with his sweater smelling like bleach and a little triumph. "I love you, but I am very, very disappointed." He swallowed. "I know," he said, and I watched the words move through him like medicine you don't want to take because it tastes like orange but works anyway. He called Marcus next. My son cleared his throat the way he always does, and then he breathed out hard, and then he said, "All right," in the practical voice that has fixed wobbly chairs and marriages for friends and basement wiring. "What do you need from me?" he asked, and I said, "Just your quiet for tonight," and he gave it. When the calls were over, the tea was half gone, and the ice had melted into a less sweet drink that tasted like the bottom of summer. Tom reached for the ring on the note, his finger hovering, and I watched him check himself like a man who has learned he cannot pluck a flower from someone else's garden. "I want you to hear me," I said. "I am not going to involve anyone else in deciding what happens between us until I have spoken to a lawyer with kind eyes and a practical mind. I have put money aside for that. Don't look surprised. Librarians teach you things. I am not moving out of my house tonight. I am not packing you a bag. You are going to sleep in the guest room for now, and you are going to respect the quiet I deserve in my own bed. You are going to speak to our children on Sunday, both of them, at the table. And you are going to say the same words you said here, with fewer excuses. If you bring Wednesday into my Monday, you do it cleanly. Do you understand?" He nodded, small. He looked so tired for a moment that I wanted to put a hand on his cheek and say, "Rest." But rest is for people who have carried their share. He will earn his sleep one day at a time. "And Tom," I said, because the thing in me that has watched and waited for years finally stood tall. "You will call her instead of letting her wait for texts with those dots that don't resolve. You will tell her the same truth. Let her make her life without your Wednesdays squatting in it like a secret. Don't leave her standing at a door with hospitality in her hands and no idea she's not welcome." He looked at me, and I could see he wanted to say I was being cruel. But no one who has ever been truly mean would keep her voice as gentle as mine felt in my throat. There is a difference between punishment and consequence. I am too old to pick up sticks for kindling when what I need is a chair and a full glass of water. Maddie came by, eyes asking what we needed. "The meatloaf," I said, surprising even myself, "with extra gravy, and 2 forks. She smiled. Not a smirk, not a pitying thing, just a simple acknowledgement that we all do what we need in the rooms where we choose to do it. When she brought the plate, it smelled like every warm Wednesday in the world. We ate quietly, and I thought of all the times I have watched him chew and swallow, the way he closes his eyes for a second when he finds something almost perfect on his tongue. That, too, is a catalog of intimacy, and I honored it even while I turned its page. I paid. I tipped Maddie like she was my niece headed off to nursing school, because acts of courage deserve rent money. As I signed my name on the slip, my hand was steady. The name looked like my mother's in its way, the loop on the AR clean and sure. I left the ring under the note and set my water glass on top, the way you press a leaf you want to keep for the fall. It is not that I was giving the ring to the restaurant or to Maddie or even to Tom. I was giving it to the moment. Let it sit there a while. Let it live in this booth where truth had been courted, then avoided, then summoned. He looked at me in alarm when I stood. "You're leaving it?" "I am leaving it for now," I said. "I am not in the habit of making permanent decisions in places with paper napkins. I will come back for it when I decide whether my finger wants it again." We stepped into the rain. It had that hot, hard smell that Raleigh rain gets in July, like asphalt in relief. The parking lot was a mirror for headlights, and somewhere 2 teenagers were laughing under the awning because getting wet at that age feels like a dare instead of a nuisance. The silver Honda waited, polite. He touched my elbow to guide me, and I let him, because habit is a sturdy bridge, and there's no virtue in refusing a steadying hand when a foot could slip. But I felt the difference in my own arm. It was no longer a thing to be steered. It was a woman's limb, attached to a woman's body, attached to a woman's life that felt, finally, wholly hers. When he opened the passenger door for me, I paused. The pine air freshener swung lazily. Under it, a small white bag rested on the floor mat. Cookies from Lowe's Foods, the chewy kind we buy for Lucas when he has a good week at speech therapy. In that moment, the threads of my life tumbled into one knot. Grandson's reward, husband's Wednesdays, my own name pressed in faded ink inside a book. "Wait," I said, and he stopped, hand on the top edge of the door. I went back inside, the bell's shy laugh greeting me again. I walked to the booth, the same path he had taken with her an hour ago. The ring sat on the note, the glass fogging like breath on a window. I lifted the water and took the ring in my palm. I slipped it, just for a second, over the tip of my finger and felt the cool, familiar hug of metal. Then I closed my fist around it and put both the ring and the note in my purse. If symbols were to lead me, I wouldn't leave them in a room where someone might wipe them away with a damp rag in the morning. When I came back to the car, he was looking at the sky like it would offer a cue. He started to say something and then didn't. "I don't need anything from you tonight," I said as I clicked my seatbelt, the fabric whispering across my shoulder. "What I need is to sleep in my bed, without imagining Wednesdays. What I need is the small courage of putting my own night cream on my face and setting the alarm and believing that what I did at that table was enough for now." He nodded, and for a moment, his face looked exactly like it had the day we brought Marcus home from the hospital. A kind of odd fear that I found almost tender in the mirror of memory. He started the car. We drove through puddles that announced themselves in little fans on the sides of the road. We didn't talk. On Glenwood, the Krispy Kreme hot sign glowed like a promise you shouldn't accept if you are trying to be good to yourself. I smiled in spite of myself. Life is always offering sugar to women who have just done something hard. At home, I went to our bedroom and closed the door behind me, with the quiet click I have mastered over decades of naps and sick days, and "this is where mama is" moments. I set my purse down. I took the shoebox out of the closet and put the note and the ring inside, on top of the tax returns and the birth certificates and my mother's reminder that I am allowed good things. I sat on the bed and smoothed the coverlet the way I do when I am too still to pace. I thought of the young woman's bracelet, the way the pineapple flashed. I thought of my own brass pineapple trivet on the counter. I went to the kitchen and picked it up. The brass was warm from the afternoon it had spent catching sunlight near the sink. I wiped it with a dish towel and set it not on the counter but on the kitchen table, centered, as if it were a centerpiece at a dinner whose guests had not yet arrived. Hospitality means opening the door to what is honest. If a pineapple is to live in my house, let it remind me of that. When I ask myself one day why I kept it there, I want the answer to be, because I welcomed myself home. On my way back to the bedroom, I passed the guest room. Tom was standing there holding a pillow he'd grabbed from the linen closet, his blue shirt tucked in even though there was no one left to be impressed. He looked like a boy on his first night at camp. He looked like a man who had discovered that Wednesday has a cost. I didn't say, "Bless your heart," because that phrase hides too much. I didn't say "I told you so" because we both knew I hadn't told him anything at all. I just nodded once. He nodded back. We are learning a new language, I thought. The words will be small at first. In my room, I did what I had promised myself. I washed my face. I put on night cream that smells faintly of rose. I pulled on the sea green sweater my mother knit when I was young and thought sweaters were just for keeping you warm. The wool was too heavy for July, but the weight anchored me. I slipped my fingers into the pocket and felt nothing but the smooth knit, just me and thread and time. The sweater can be my other symbol, I thought. The note and the ring for decision, the sweater for comfort. I am allowed both. Then I turned out the light. The dark settled like a friend who knows how to sit quietly beside you. In the next room, I heard him set the pillow down. I heard the click of the guest room lamp, the sigh of springs, a cough swallowed because he's always tried to be polite about the noises bodies make in the night. I lay there counting my own breath. 4 in, hold, 4 out, hold. The way the yoga teacher at the senior center had taught us, her voice a kindly metronome over the whir of the fans. I thought of what comes next. Lawyer with kind eyes, a conversation on Sunday, casseroles to accept without telling the truth to everyone who arrives at our door, because not every visitor has earned it. I thought of the library tomorrow, and the cart of picture books I'll reshelve for the children who will walk into their own Wednesdays one day, and not know yet how to keep them. I thought of Ruth's hand on mine at Panera, of the blue frosting on the cake, of my grandson's paper crown tipped like a question. There is a point in every story where the light changes. The photographer I once wanted to be would call it the hour when the sun sits lower and makes everything honest. I had found mine in a vinyl booth under a photograph of a boat going out into fog. If that isn't an American parable, I don't know what is. I closed my eyes. I slept. And when I woke, morning smelled like coffee again, and the fern hung on the porch like ladies gossiping, and the air was new in that way. Air is after rain, and I knew, like I know the creak in the third stair, the line I had drawn would hold, because I had drawn it in my own hand, with my mother's name in my blood, and because there comes a moment in a woman's life when she understands that hospitality without boundaries is just a table set for someone who doesn't bother to sit down. On my kitchen table, the brass pineapple caught the first light. It glowed, a small, stubborn sun. I touched it and felt the cool metal warm under my palm, and it was enough, for now, to begin the day with that small, glowing truth. The next few days felt as if the world had been nudged off its usual axles and was finding a new rhythm. The immediate aftermath of Booth 12 wasn't fireworks or a dramatic cliff. It was the quiet noise of things rearranging themselves. Tom slept in the guest room that first night, a small surrender that felt both like punishment and relief. He left his shoes neatly by the door. He has always been annoyingly neat. And in the mornings I would find the house arranged in the way he thinks will soothe me. Mail beside my glasses, the porch fern watered, the coffee ground bin emptied. Habits like his are a terrain I know well, and they were oddly comforting even as they reminded me I had chosen to stay, for now, in the same house with a man who had hollowed out Wednesday nights. I made the call to an attorney with kind eyes. Ruth had recommended her, and Ruth was right. Kind doesn't mean weak. And I went to her office 3 days later carrying the shoebox like a relic. We talked practical things, joint accounts, what a separation might look like if I wanted one, what protections were reasonable. She did not flinch at the smallness of my savings or at the $300 pawnshop sale of my mother's ring years ago. She arranged possibilities in a way that made me feel less alone. A plan is a kind of company. I left with a sheet of paper and a calm I had not expected. In our kitchen, Tom and I lived in the hush between sentences. We ate breakfast at different times like old roommates who still own the same sponge. He began to go to a group at the church for men who have betrayed the people they love, a phrase the pastor said at coffee hour like a small, blunt instrument. He went reluctantly, then began to speak like a man learning the vocabulary of remorse. I saw the meetings leave little notes of embarrassment on his face, and little threads of ability to listen on his shoulders. Paige messaged me one afternoon. I had not reached out to her. Ruth's counsel had been clear that I should not phone the younger woman and risk a scene. But when her text arrived, it read something simple and honest. "I'm sorry for the mess. I didn't know." I wrote back, "Thank you for telling the truth. I hope you find a life in which you are the whole, not someone's weekday." She responded with a string of words that read like someone clearing their throat in public. She had moved apartments. She'd quit the job that felt like a closet for her life. She was going back to school. She wanted a fresh start, and I owed her the grace of letting her find it. Sunday came like an old hymn. I set the table with the good plates we rarely used, those from my mother's wedding set that we pulled out for holidays. I cooked a pan of cornbread, and tucked a dish of pimento cheese into the center because some things, like certain southern tastes, heal in small ways. Claire and Marcus arrived, both more serious than their usual selves. Lucas climbed into my lap and asked, with the eternal honesty of 4-year-olds, "Grandma, is Daddy being bad?" I laughed, not because the question was funny, but because laughter felt like permission to be ordinary in a day that could have been monstrous. We sat at the table, the sun coming through the kitchen blinds in tidy stripes. Tom's hands shook a little as he filled his plate. He patted the table next to him for Claire to sit and looked at me long enough to whisper, "I'm sorry," the private kind of apology a man says before he brings a broom to sweep a floor clean. I had asked him not to make a speech, no theatrics, but he had to say more than he had said in the booth. He told them, plainly, exactly what happened. There were no theatrical excuses, no "it's complicated" that felt like a curtain meant to hide a backstage. He said he had allowed someone else into his afternoons and, in doing so, had lied to me. He said he regretted that, more humbly than I expected. Claire, who has my mother's eyes and a tenderness that both saves and scolds, set her jaw. "Dad," she said, "you hurt me and you hurt Mama. You will make amends." Marcus, who prefers action to sermons, asked what he could do to help, practicality with the love turned toward repair. They both said they loved us, and I felt that love like a slow tide come in. We made a plan then and there, with small human steps. Tom would begin individual therapy and attend couples counseling with me if I decided to join. He would give up Wednesdays at the grill and take a volunteering shift at the community food bank on Thursdays instead. He agreed to transparency with his phone and email for a season because trust needs windows more than curtains. I agreed to speak to a counselor about how to keep my boundaries without giving up my home. Marcus insisted on helping us pick a therapist, which he did with a practical skill that comes from years of fixing things. Trust, we all know, is not rebuilt overnight. It is not the sort of thing you promise and then check off with a flourish. It is a slow thing, the way grout sets between tiles. But that Sunday, with cornbread crumbs and pimento cheese on the table and the kids' laughter mixing with quiet tears, something shifted. The house that had been a museum for our cautious habits began to feel like a workshop where something could be made again. The weeks that followed were honest, if not always easy. Tom went to therapy and spoke in a raw vocabulary he had not had before. About ego, about habit, about how loneliness sometimes sounds like an invitation. He came home smelling less like citrus and more like the detergent of the friend who had loaned him the courage to show up. He called Paige and told her the truth without the frill of justifying his choices. He paid her rent for a month because he could see she needed a margin to step out. Paige, for her part, emailed me once a week with short updates on class or work she'd started and small thank you notes that felt like proper gestures for small human mistakes. I began to do things for me. The library became my refuge and my stage. One afternoon, I taught a small art class for children whose mothers couldn't afford studio fees, and I realized how easily my fingers remembered the way paint ran on paper. I re-enrolled in a community college photography class on evenings because the world looks different when you have to frame it for the lens. The women I met at the senior center became my new choir. We went on a field trip to the farmer's market and bought peaches wrapped in newspaper like they were gold, and I felt like I was counting my life in small, bright transactions. For my part, I did not undo the shoebox overnight. When Tom asked for the ring back a month later with the kind of plea that sometimes sounds like a prayer, I put my hand in the box and felt the weight of the years. The ring had the familiar groove and a warmth from decades of being worn. I thought of the night I'd left it on the note at the grill and the way the paper had looked when I left it under a glass that fogged with breath. I took it into the light and held it for a long time. Trust is not a ring you hand over because someone begs. It is something you feel in your bones when someone has been patient in the small things. The doing of Tuesday trash, the remembering of anniversaries, the way he learned to ask before he offered a fix. So I told him, calmly, "You will earn it back." Not in a punitive way, but with the small mechanics of life. Be present at Claire's open house, ask Lucas about his dinosaurs and mean it. Go to counseling, and not just to check off a box on a paper. We made a timeline. 3 months of transparency. Then a quieter conversation about whether the ring would live on my finger again. He heard me. He did not like it, but he heard me. And that is the beginning of making amends. People noticed. The church ladies who bake like diplomacy brought a casserole and sat in my sunroom while we drank tea. Ruth came over and said, "You have a spine like a city pillar, Elle." And I laughed until it softened me. There were ugly days, rumors, stares at the grocery, a neighbor who pretended not to see as she pressed a casserole dish into my hands. But there were also dozens of small acts that made me feel held. The young woman at the salon who told me, "You handled yourself like a lady," in the way that meant, you handled yourself like someone who will not be taken for granted. The cashier at Lowe's who wrapped my cookies a little more carefully because he had once seen me hand a quarter to a child who had no change for milk. These acts knit the new life into being. By the time autumn arrived, yes, it came fast, with its polite cool and the streetlights flickering on an hour earlier. The air smelled like apple fritters from a roadside stand. Tom and I had been to more than one counseling session, had listened to exercises about communication that felt, at first, contrived, and then okay, and finally oddly honest. We practiced phrases, "I feel," instead of "you always," like children learning a new grammar. He learned to say, "I'm sorry," and to mean it. I learned to say, "I need," and to ask for it without shame. There were evenings when we still tripped on old patterns, when he would joke in a way that used to make me laugh and now felt like a test. But then we would call each other out gently, like two siblings who know one another's tricks. One Saturday in early November, Tom came home with a small box wrapped in brown paper. I thought of the cheap token gifts he sometimes bought when he wanted to smooth the edges of a day, an extra bag of coffee, a silly mug. He set the box on the kitchen table like it was a trifle and sat down opposite me. "We've been going to counseling," he said, and I thought, is that my gratitude coming? Then he opened the box, and inside was a small brass pineapple charm, not unlike the one on the young woman's bracelet, but not the same. This one was heavier, aged, and had a little loop at the top. He had spent the morning at a flea market, he told me, wandering like a man wanting to find something that spoke his apology without saying a thing. I held the charm and felt a funny kind of tenderness. "Why a pineapple?" I asked. He looked at me, earnest and a little embarrassed. "Because I wanted to give you something that said welcome. But I realized that hospitality without the person being welcomed isn't hospitality at all. I want to be welcomed back into your life, not to take up a chair you already put someone else in." The words were humble and true. I thought of the pineapple trivet I'd set on my kitchen table the morning after the booth, how it had been a promise I made to myself to welcome myself home. I looked at the charm and thought of all the meanings something small can hold. "We'll make it a keychain," I said, laughing. And he smiled like someone who has just been told he can learn new things. We did not reenact a wedding. No one needed that. There were no sappy vows, no grand declarations. Instead, we rebuilt a normal life. Laundry, PTA meetings, Marcus's odd electrical fixes, Claire's new job celebrations, Lucas's birthday parties where I always put extra frosting on the top layer, like it is a favor to the future. There were still hard conversations. There were still boundaries. I am too old to pretend that everything was smoothed away by time alone. But there was also a newness that came from both of us committing to the future as a deliberate act, rather than something that happened because of inertia. I continued to go to my photography class, and one summer morning I took a picture of the pineapple trivet on my kitchen table with sunlight just right, the brass catching the light like a small stubborn sun. I printed it and put it in a frame. Later, when I stood at the doorway to the dining room and looked at it, I felt the satisfaction of a sentence finished well. The photograph was not of a ring or a receipt. It was of warmth on metal and the way light made a thing true. Months later, on a quiet evening with the windows open and cicadas giving their slow timpani, Tom asked if I wanted the ring back. It was a simple question. My hands paused over the cart of laundry, and then I went to the shoebox in the closet and took it out. The ring gleamed as if it had been waiting for permission to be honest again. I slipped it on, slow as method, and twice as respectful. It fit the same way it always had, as if my finger had accepted an old friend. But the ring did not mean we had obliterated the past. It was a pact now, not a decree. Wearing it felt like choosing, again and again, to be in this life with him, but not because I was dependent upon him. Rather because I was a woman who could both forgive and be cautious. Life does not tidy itself into a photograph. There are still days when I think of the note on the booth and feel the cold in my chest. There are afternoons when Tom brings home strawberries and tells a corny joke that makes us both laugh and then blush at having laughed. There are Sunday potlucks where I sit among friends and church folk who have their opinions about the length of marriage and the right measure of forgiveness. I do not live to please them. I live to please the steady person who gets up with me in the morning, and the one who likes to read the sports page not because he cares, but because he likes the rustle of newsprint. I live to please myself. The pineapple remains on the table. It is both a reminder and a promise that hospitality includes myself, that I can welcome without being diminished, and that small, shining things can hold the light when you need it most. Sometimes I touch it in the mornings, fingers running over the brass like tracing a map. I keep the shoebox in the closet, ring inside, with the receipts and the tax forms and my mother's tenacious handwriting telling me I am allowed good things. The note from Maddie, the one that started it all, stays folded in my wallet, a slim proof that truth sometimes arrives on napkin edges and in the hands of people who don't expect to change anyone's life by telling it. If you ask me what victory looks like now, I will say it is this: the ability to eat meatloaf in a public place without the ghost of a secret threading through my fork, the capacity to say, I need, and have someone hear it, and the quiet mornings where the tea is exactly as I like it, and my heart is not a clenched fist. There is peace in choosing boundaries, and there is joy in allowing someone back in, when they have learned how to come in humbly and stay humbly. I have not lost the truest part of myself. I have not given up my right to be surprised by my own desires. I have learned the peculiar power of keeping something for yourself: a shoebox in the closet, a brass pineapple on the table, a ring that is put on and taken off like a prayer. My freedom and my reconciliation live together now, not as opposites, but as two hands holding a quilt. The quilt keeps me warm. So, if you ever wonder what you would do in a vinyl booth with a butter-smudged receipt and a waitress with good courage, know this: you can set the ring and the note down where everyone can see them, but you are the one who chooses whether to leave them there or to take them home. You are the one who decides the shape of the welcome you offer yourself. If my story touched you, tell me in the comments what symbol you keep on your table. What little thing holds your courage? If you felt less alone reading this, press the like button so the world knows you care. And if you want to walk the next chapter with me, to see how a life is quietly rebuilt day by day, please subscribe. Hospitality begins at home. For me, it began when I learned to welcome myself back. There is a kind of light that comes for people who decide to stay, and a kind that comes for people who decide to leave. The bravest thing I have done is to choose both for myself, to be both available and guarded, to welcome and to protect. The pineapple on my table is a small, stubborn sun, and it taught me that to be hospitable to others, you must first be hospitable to yourself.